At 5:12 in the morning, San Francisco, California, witnessed a federal strike under cover of darkness. Hidden narcotics lay buried under a quiet residential house. A smuggling ring was shielded by the very streets intended to connect us. This represents the most massive violation of legal honor this metropolis has ever witnessed. To uncover the complete reality of this mission, please press like to help this narrative spread to a wider audience. This joint task force effort, spearheaded by the DEA alongside local, state, indigenous, and federal allies, aimed at one of the biggest and deadliest narcotic and foreign terror groups in the nation. 22 kilograms of powder were concealed within the foundation of a Chinese magistrate's residential property. It was not merely a stockpile for a syndicate. It was not a bandit's lair located on the urban fringe. Instead, it was the utter failure of morality concealed behind the entrance to a hall of justice. This was not graft infiltrating from the exterior. It was rot festering internally, authorized, finalized, and guarded by a figure wearing judicial vestments. The things interred here were not simply narcotics. It was terror. It was an infrastructure conditioned to avert its gaze. Do not depart. The following segment is the portion they desperately wished to keep concealed. At 12 minutes past 5, the city of San Francisco was partially slumbering. The avenues were silent, with faint entry lamps, lacking alarms or alerts. Suddenly, the stillness shattered. Operatives from the FBI and ICE stormed the residence of Magistrate Jiangming Huang. Externally, the dwelling appeared benign. Pruned shrubbery and drawn drapes made it a home nobody doubted, yet the officers already understood it was a fabrication. The entrance collapsed. Heavy footsteps pounded against the timber decking. Orders reverberated down narrow corridors as squads swept the property. Everything appeared normal until the layout ceased to follow logic. A concealed catch revealed a vacant partition. Back of it, a shaft descended under the residence. Within, 22 kilos of contraband sat wrapped and piled high. Guns were arranged along the sides, resembling a personal armory. Further down lay a secured chamber. Upon opening, 3 young females were discovered shackled within, breathing but mute and petrified. Simultaneously, on the other side of town, Jiangming Huang was detained at a gambling hall. This was not a haphazard strike. It was the disintegration of a falsehood guarded by authority, at last revealed. If such things were concealed under a magistrate's house for ages, consider what other horrors have remained invisible. Press the like button so this inquiry finds those who continue to trust that the establishment shields them. He was found guilty in a federal tribunal of narcotics, smuggling, and holding a weapon to aid that smuggling, serving almost 20 years in a federal penitentiary for those crimes. He was at that time, and continues to be, an undocumented foreigner, illegally residing within the American borders. For 8 years, Jiangming Huang did not evade the establishment. He dominated it. At age 46, relied upon to determine who remained at liberty and who forfeited their existence to a cage, he existed beyond doubt. His tribunal was silent. His judgments were final. Yet beneath the gown, a horror was permitted to flourish. The initial indicators were not warnings or alarms. They were vacant sleeping quarters. Young women vanished, not merely scores, but vast multitudes. They ranged from 16 to 22 years of age. There were no requests for money, no corpses, only relatives submitting complaints that led nowhere. Detectives subsequently verified over 1,000 casualties enticed by bogus fashion gigs and simple employment listings. Every female was solicited for private data, followed by intimate pictures. That constituted the snare. After being captured, no exit existed. Those photographs transformed into tethers, refuse orders, and they would be revealed. Flee and brutality ensued. Certain captives were transferred from residence to residence, trafficked repeatedly. Others were battered until they shattered. Utilized as cautions to the others, a number ended their own existences. They preferred dying to facing what lurked behind secured gates. This was not anarchy. It was a regime. CN's status rendered him invulnerable. Grievances halted. Authorizations lapsed. Proof evaporated. Documents went missing beneath his autograph. Whenever law enforcement approached, dossiers were transferred. Whenever observers testified, they were undermined. This was not an error. It was not a malfunction. It was engineered by a magistrate who converted the statute into a guard and the tribunal into a camouflage for dread. This web endured because individuals remained quiet. If you refuse to remark, simply type "exposed" and follow. This inquiry proceeds. What commenced as filings for lost individuals rapidly unveiled something much more terrible than a smuggling circle. This was a plant constructed to exploit human frailty. Zhang Minghuang's syndicate did not begin with manacles or firearms. It began with falsehoods distributed en masse. Detectives tracked thousands of internet postings, guaranteeing fashion roles, hospitality duties, and quick cash. The ambush was effective. Over 8 years, in excess of 1,000 sufferers were verified. Many were reached within days of responding. As soon as private details and graphic photos were gathered, the situation altered. Amiable texts morphed into orders. Denial sparked menaces against relatives, residency standing, and honor. The pictures became armaments. Captives were shifted among flats, spa facades, and secluded chambers managed by the ring. Some were auctioned repeatedly. Others were assaulted or tormented to establish precedents. Scores tried self-destruction. Several accomplished it. The directive was plain: comply or face annihilation. Dread by itself was insufficient. The organization compelled quiet through brutality. Jianang brought in strong men from overseas, males possessing penal records and zero to forfeit. Sneaked in via corrupted routes, they pursued fugitives, shadowed observers, and eliminated anyone who witnessed excessive details. Murders were arranged to resemble drug excesses or mishaps, and everything endured because justice moved out of the way. Grievances were interred. Beats were rerouted. Documentation halted upon order. The infrastructure did not fracture. It was commandeered. This was no longer merely a smuggling matter. It was a danger to homeland safety. An illicit engine was lodged within the judicial framework, expanding until an individual eventually switched on the illumination. Do you believe this structure malfunctioned, or was it shielding them? Please note, failed or protected underneath. When the final fragment of proof clicked into position, the federal leadership issued the decision. This was no longer an inquiry. It was a combat-grade dismantling. At 4:30 in the morning, Operation Broken Oath commenced. Throughout San Francisco, the metropolis slumbered, ignorant that almost 2,000 federal officers were already active. FBI, ICE, DEA, DHS, ATF, and JTF units gathered from all angles. Choppers sliced low amidst the seaside mist. UAVs ascended quietly above the shingles. Strategic vehicles blocked off neighborhoods lacking any alarms. The goal was plain and total: sever the organization's backbone before it could disperse. The initial entry struck a storage facility by the docks. Metal gates crumpled beneath battering devices. Within, weaponized guards attempted to flee. Stun grenades exploded. Yells resounded down cement halls. Shots rang out. Brief, savage volleys occurred before federal squads overran the location. In moments, the accused were on the floor, wrists bound, visages crushed against frigid concrete. Skids of drugs were piled behind sham partitions. Fentanyl machines, fake tablet casts, and toxic barrels were confiscated. Sufficient substance to contaminate whole districts. At the same time, squads hit secure dwellings throughout Chinatown and the Mission area. Certain spots surrendered immediately, while others resisted. In a single flat complex, a weaponized unit tried to incinerate records and mobiles before officers pushed in via steps and terraces. Dog squads caught sprinters in the back streets. Heat sensors located individuals concealing themselves amidst partitions and narrow voids. No exit paths remained viable at a slopeside facility. Opposition reached its height. Guards barricaded a chamber and shot through strengthened portals. Officers fired back with precision as mediators called for submission. When the barrier ultimately collapsed, the space became quiet. One more hub disintegrated. Scores were detained, arms confiscated, with no withdrawal. By dawn, the extent became irrefutable. Numerous control centers were disabled. Hundreds of captures, tons of narcotics taken, and hundreds of guns retrieved, many possessing erased identification codes. Books listed bribes to bureaucrats, timelines for deliveries, and directions written in neat, intentional script. A single memo appearing in multiple dossiers froze the researchers. Approval assured. While media choppers hovered, the town aroused to barricades and blinking beacons exterior to state edifices. Identities emerged. Bureaucrats were suspended. Funds were locked. Real estate was appropriated. The guard that had defended the syndicate splintered within hours. Operation Broken Oath did not terminate a delinquency statistic. It tore apart a structure, one that had transformed power into disguise and terror into money. The thing that collapsed that forenoon was not merely a syndicate route. It was the mirage that authority, once tainted, could stay concealed permanently. What occurs subsequently uncovers the true depth of this graft. Join now, because narratives such as this do not conclude with a single clip. With the primary avenues destroyed, detectives lastly perceived the complete framework that had existed beneath Jiang Minghuang's command. This was not a casual loop of outlaws. It was Hongqi, a regimented body established to smuggle narcotics, humans, and dread with pitiless competency. Jiang was no remote backer. He was the core hub, authorizing transfers, allocating security, and settling arguments with a magistrate's autograph. The brawn originated overseas. Federal records noted hundreds of draftees transported into the states unlawfully. Males with brutal pasts, zero schooling, and no route to return. They were chosen specifically since they possessed nothing to forfeit. Upon entry, they were assigned to units with a single directive: compel dominance. Thrashings were standard. Menaces were perpetual. Anybody attempting to flee was tracked to create a precedent. Quiet was upheld, not through coaxing, but through horror. Cash kept the apparatus running. Gains from smuggling and coerced sex work were laundered via gambling halls, turned into tokens, then back to sanitized currency. Bigger amounts were directed via middlemen and transmitted to Chinese financial conduits, vanishing over frontiers before accountants could respond. Within 1 year, researchers followed tens of millions in funds cycling through these loops, too rapid, too neat, and too guarded to be chance. Defense originated from inside the government. Detectives verified 39 law enforcement agents on the ledger, getting consistent wages for slowed reactions, diverted beats, and early alerts. At the summit, the regional sheriff took $42,000 monthly, a fixed rate to maintain routes accessible and inquiries shut. This was not graft as a lure, it was graft as a paycheck. The partnership with the Sinaloa syndicate raised Honghui from a local ravager to a countrywide menace. Chiang's web focused on fentanyl supply, transporting goods into crowded city zones where need was assured and discovery was weakened. Tablets were stamped to simulate valid prescriptions. Dust was mixed into heroin to optimize addiction and gain. Every load increased damage with clinical exactness. What stunned detectives most was the magnitude of the defense. For ages, proof appeared and disappeared. Files languished, subpoenas lapsed, observers were maligned. The mechanism did not fail, it obeyed. Janang's gown was not simply a disguise, it was authorization. When the charting was finished, a single fact was inescapable. Hailong Hui flourished because policing was broken from the interior. This was not a mob concealing itself from the law. It was a mob eating through it, until Broken Oath cut the supply cords and revealed how far the decay had reached. As agents took apart the group's hierarchy, a grimmer reality emerged. Halong Hui was not constructed on sex trade or blackmail. Those were income sources. The primary armament was fentanyl. Federal researchers verified that Jiang Minghong's web dealt in ultra-strong artificial narcotics, shifting them with exactitude into the core of San Francisco. Fentanyl was selected for a single motive: efficacy. An amount tinier than a rice kernel can slay. Several kilos can eradicate whole districts. The profits were savage, and the death toll was regarded as incidental. The provision line led back to source chemicals from China, sent via middlemen and merged with delivery routes tied to the Sinaloa mob. Once within the states, the substance altered shape to dodge discovery. Certain loads were molded into fake tablets, marked to resemble real analgesics or calmants. Others were treated as dust, silently mixed into heroin, so consumers never realized what they were ingesting until they ceased respiring. Compact neighborhoods were aimed at intentionally. Zones with significant foreign-born residents, packed dwellings, and scarce faith in officials became ideal avenues. Chinatown was not picked randomly. It provided obscurity, currency-driven commerce, and a steady stream of folks passing unobserved. The narcotics traveled quickly, and the fatalities ensued even quicker. The effect was devastating. From 2024 until now, San Francisco logged 896 drug-induced fatalities linked to fentanyl. Urgent care centers were swamped. Paramedics packed naloxone as basic equipment, occasionally dispensing it several times to the identical individual in one evening. Numerous victims never reached a clinic. Some fell in restrooms. Others perished solitarily in flats, mislabeled as mishaps until trends appeared. Brutality increased together with habit. Territory arguments erupted. 125 mob-connected firings were tied to supply areas managed by the web. 211 gunpoint thefts ensued as reliance morphed into hopelessness. Whole squares changed overnight from communities to hazard areas with no alert. What rendered fentanyl singularly deadly was not merely its power, it was its imperceptibility. Consumers assumed they were purchasing something recognizable. Relatives trusted their offspring were swallowing medicine. The reality landed only following the alarms. Detectives determined that this was not careless smuggling. It was planned immersion: swamp the bazaar, break opposition, substitute consumers quicker than tombs could be occupied, and everything ran under defense until Broken Oath smashed the barrier. When the confiscations were tallied, officers comprehended the magnitude. The narcotics extracted during the strikes symbolized millions of fatal portions, existences not yet forfeited. Destinies paused. Fentanyl was never merely a substance in this instance. It was a mute armament, utilized intentionally until the regime that guarded it lastly snapped. As the invasions concluded and proof lockers stuffed up, detectives shifted to the most perilous tier of the affair, the defense web. What they revealed was not sporadic grafting or solitary bad behavior. It was power transformed into a wage bill. Money books, disposable mobiles, and coded texts proved that 39 constables spanning various districts were getting steady bribes. The sums differed, yet the aim never altered. Slowed reactions, diverted beats, early alerts prior to checks, and quiet when sufferers attempted to declare cruelty. Summons were reduced. Files were misplaced. Time, the most precious resource in policing, was purposefully squandered. In the middle of the guard was the district sheriff. Financial logs displayed a steady deposit, $42,000 each month, sent via go-betweens and masked as advisory revenue. In exchange, internal department grievances paused. Assignment commands were modified. Inquiries lost speed before they could attain a subpoena. It was not leverage. It was assurance paid on time. The grasp went past badges. Town administrators rushed authorizations. Construction surveyors ignored breaches. Sanitation and permit grievances disappeared after being recorded. Every endorsement created another stratum of disguise, permitting estates to function as secure spots, bordellos, and holding depots without break. In documents, everything seemed lawful. In truth, the municipality's own procedures were opening ways for felony. Observer bullying adhered to a known routine. Whenever a sufferer attempted to talk, constables already informed of the group's concerns would show up initially, not to defend, but to dissuade. Declarations were doubted fiercely. Trustworthiness was assaulted. Residency anxieties were silently heightened. Numerous pulled back. Others vanished from the grid completely. Detectives subsequently connected various skipped check-ins to the identical agents showing up frequently in the bribe lists. The harm was additive. Throughout years, faith wore away street by street. Locals ceased phoning for aid. Parents cautioned their kids to remain quiet. Neighborhood heads cited menaces after posing excessive queries. Brutality thrived where responsibility failed. The signal traveled fast. Notifying only rendered matters poorer. When Broken Oath revealed the roster of bought bureaucrats, the stun was instant. Constables were put on suspension. Shields were gathered. Duty guns were locked up. The sheriff's department released a declaration, then a second, each more muted than the previous. Urgent meetings were gathered behind shut gates. Labor delegates separated themselves. The municipal center paused agreements and started reviews that extended back ages. Still, opposition appeared too. Certain people charged federal bureaus with excess. Others doubted the schedule. A handful tried to recast the proof as confusions or clerical mistakes, yet the files were exact. Dates, sums, sources. The graft was not suggested. It was recorded. What detectives highlighted in meetings was grim. This web did not last because it was smart. It lasted because folks vowed to halt it, were bribed to defend it. The machine didn't merely let down sufferers, it functioned in opposition to them. By the week's close, attorneys readied accusations that exceeded narcotics and smuggling. They aimed at violation of vow, plotting, hindrance, and organized crime. The objective was not solely to break a syndicate, but to re-establish the line between power and responsibility. The moral was inescapable. When control is purchased, fairness turns elective. And whenever fairness turns elective, whole neighborhoods bear the cost until revelation compels the judgment nobody desired, yet everybody required. As the strikes calmed and proof chambers packed, detectives shifted to the most perilous level of the matter, the defense web. What they found was not sporadic payoff or lonely wrongdoing. It was command turned into salary. Cash books, throwaway cells, and locked texts proved that 39 constables across various zones were getting frequent stipends. The figures differed, but the goal never shifted. Slowed answers, rerouted beats, early alerts prior to audits, and quiet when sufferers attempted to state cruelty. Rings were lowered in priority. Files were wrongly sorted. Time, the most precious holding in policing, was purposefully squandered. At the core of the guard was the district sheriff. Account logs displayed a steady movement, $42,000 each month, directed via middlemen and masked as advisory earnings. In exchange, internal review grievances paused. Duty mandates were modified. Probes lost steam before they could attain a subpoena. It was not sway. It was assurance, paid on time. The extent went past badges. Town registrars hastened licenses. Construction checkers ignored infringements. Sanitation and permit grievances disappeared after being noted. Every consent built another tier of mask, letting estates function as secure spots, bordellos, and holding depots without break. In writing, everything seemed lawful. In truth, the municipality's own mechanisms were opening trails for felony. Observer bullying adhered to a known design. Whenever a sufferer tried to talk, constables already updated on the group's needs would show up initially, not to guard, but to dissuade. Testimonies were doubted fiercely. Believability was assaulted. Residency terrors were silently increased. Numerous pulled back. Others vanished from the grid wholly. Detectives later tied various neglected check-ins to the identical agents showing up often in the wage lists. The harm was additive. Over years, faith wore away street by street. Locals ceased phoning for aid. Kin cautioned their kids to keep quiet. Local heads noted menaces after posing excessive queries. Brutality thrived where answerability failed. The signal traveled fast. Notifying only made things worse. When Broken Oath revealed the roster of bought bureaucrats, the stun was instant. Constables were put on suspension. Shields were gathered. Duty guns were locked up. The sheriff's department released a declaration, then a second, each more muted than the previous. Urgent meetings were gathered behind shut gates. Labor delegates separated themselves. The municipal center paused agreements and started reviews that extended back ages. Still, opposition appeared too. Certain people charged federal bureaus with excess. Others doubted the schedule. A handful tried to recast the proof as confusions or clerical mistakes, yet the files were exact. Dates, sums, sources. The graft was not suggested, it was recorded. What detectives highlighted in meetings was grim. This web did not last because it was smart. It lasted because folks vowed to halt it, were bribed to defend it. The machine didn't merely let down sufferers, it functioned in opposition to them. By the week's close, attorneys readied accusations that exceeded narcotics and smuggling. They aimed at violation of vow, plotting, hindrance, and organized crime. The objective was not solely to break a syndicate, but to re-establish the line between power and responsibility. The moral was inescapable. When control is purchased, fairness turns elective. And whenever fairness turns elective, whole neighborhoods bear the cost until revelation compels the judgment nobody desired, yet everybody required. What this matter ultimately revealed was not merely a felonious kingdom, but a perilous fantasy. The conviction that might, once tainted, can stay concealed permanently. For ages, Jiang Minghuang's web endured not because it was unseen, but because it was guarded. Guarded by quiet, guarded by terror, guarded by command, abused. However, that guard cracked. It cracked because federal operatives declined to embrace the iteration of truth given to them, because researchers tracked figures that lacked logic, because detectives heeded trends others rejected, and because when the proof ultimately matched, American policing performed what it was constructed to do: move resolutely and lacking concession. Operation Broken Oath was not regarding display. It was regarding reinstating limits. It was regarding demonstrating that no gown, no shield, no rank puts anybody over answerability. When the structure was tested from the interior, the reaction arrived from experts who comprehended what was at risk: neighborhoods, existences, and the validity of fairness itself. The moral here is plain. Felonious webs do not crumble by themselves. They are taken apart by tenacity, organization, and the bravery to face uneasy facts. FBI operatives, ICE deputies, DEA squads, and federal attorneys did not merely eliminate narcotics from the roads or detain outlaws. They recovered territory that had been silently yielded to dread. This instance also acts as a caution. Graft does not declare itself. It implants, it standardizes, and it eats on neglect. The price is tallied not solely in currency or captures, but in faith misplaced and existences ruined. Still, this narrative concludes with something mightier than fury: evidence. Evidence that when agencies are tested, they can yet answer. That when the statute is treacherously treated, it can yet guard itself. And that even when graft extends far, the United States keeps something its foes undervalue: experts ready to reveal it, face it, and close it off. Fairness did not come silently, but it came.